Hey Michigan fans, Keith here from Lewis Jewelers, and we are super excited to be able to cheer on all the student athletes that will be on the field and the courts this season. But just like Michigan sports, special moments have not been canceled. Come into Lewis Jewelers or visit lewisjewelers.com so our team can help you celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, or your just because moments. Go Blue!
Lewis Jewelers, celebrate the moments.
Welcome to the Wolverines.com podcast. I'm Clayton Sayfie with Austin Fox. This is the Maize and Blue breakdown for this week. It's October already, so it is game month for Michigan. Creeping there, we're starting to get closer and closer to Michigan against Minnesota on October 24th, Austin. I mean, it's kind of like we're August maybe 8th-ish now. I didn't do the exact math, but feels like fall camp is starting to happen, I guess, if you can call it fall camp. They're in school, so it's not like they're dedicating all their time to football, but the pads are on. Time to separate the men from the t-shirts.
Yeah, exactly, and it's really starting to feel like fall out. It's supposed to be extremely cold this weekend. I'm just looking at my phone now, and it says a low of 32 on Friday night here in Michigan. So, like you said, we're in October now, and that means Michigan football's right around the corner. We're just a few weeks away, but yeah, it's good. It's good that it's finally getting close, and it's starting to feel like it. We're talking to the Michigan coaches on a regular basis now, and several of the players several times a week. So you can tell that it's finally in the air and that we're only a few weeks away from the season kicking off now.
Yeah, and just looking at this week in sports in general, we had Duncan Robinson in the finals last night starting. We had 8 baseball games yesterday. I know you're a big baseball guy, bigger than me, but I still loved watching some day baseball while we're working here. Throw it up on a monitor or a TV. 8 games. We have 5 baseball games today. We have Thursday night football. I'm not going to mention that it's a bad matchup in the Broncos and the Jets, but it's still football. We had SEC football over the weekend open up, and that really, it made it really feel more like college football. But can't wait till the Big Ten comes into play here on October 23rd and 24th. First, though, I did want to dive into the presidential debate from Tuesday night. Austin, what were your thoughts on that?
Well, seeing as how politics is one of the primary items that we're not allowed to talk about on the Wolverine.com message boards, I feel like that's a trick question. So I actually barely watched any of it. I heard it was a joke from a lot of people, so I'm just going to avoid that question altogether.
I was just kidding. We don't have to talk about it. Just joking. We're going to talk about Michigan football here. Before we do so, we'll remind everybody that the Wolverine.com is on the Rivals Network. You can head over there, get all of your premium content. We got Michigan football, basketball, recruiting insider information. You can use promo code BLUE60 for 60 days for free of that premium content. And I promise no presidential debate talk over there. But let's get into some of the top storylines of the week, Austin, for Michigan football. Some things that we learned about the offense, some things we learned about the defense. We had Jim Harbaugh on his radio show Monday night. Ed Warner hopped on there as well. Then Don Brown had a press conference yesterday, Wednesday, over Zoom for 45 minutes. So a ton of stuff from him. He talked about the entire defense. But let's start with the offense, Austin. What's some of the primary things you learned this week about Michigan's offense?
Yeah, the offensive line, when Ed Warner talked about them, were several of my biggest takeaways. He basically revealed the entire depth chart along the offensive front. And Ed Warner's always been one of the most open and one of the most talkative coaches on this Michigan staff, and he's really a fan favorite for that reason. We knew several of the starters would be along the front. You knew redshirt sophomore Jalen Mayfield was going to start at that right tackle spot, and you knew that fellow redshirt sophomore Ryan Hayes was going to start at left tackle, but it really sounds like Chuck Filiaga has finally stepped up at that left guard spot. It's really now or never for him. He's a redshirt junior. He came to Michigan as a top 200 four-star prospect out of Texas, but he's never started a game here. He has a ton of potential. He stands 6'6", 345 pounds, so he's just a huge, huge player. But again, it sounds like he's finally putting it together, and that's really good to see. And another guy who has really stepped up this offseason, I think to the surprise of many, is fifth-year senior Andrew Vistardis at center. He is a former walk-on. He was put on scholarship, and he's actually been named a captain. So it really has a Graham Glasgow feel to it. I know several people have made that comparison. And at this point, there's no question that he's going to be the starting center for this team. And then you have redshirt junior Andrew Stuber at right guard. I think he'll definitely win that right guard spot. And when you look at the starting five, there's actually quite a bit of veteran experience on this group, especially on the interior, when considering both Stuber and Filiaga are redshirt juniors and Vistardis as a fifth-year senior at center. And then, of course, you have Jalen Mayfield, who started all of last year. So I know a lot of people are worried about this offensive line unit as a whole, and I am a little bit to a degree, but I think that we're going to see some growing pains early on. But with Ed Warner leading this group, I expect this to be a pretty darn good offensive line unit by the end of the season.
Yeah, it was one of those things where it's like, okay, this is going to be a really young offensive line. There's going to be the growing pains. And I agree with you that there will be to an extent, but there's 3 guys in there now that Mayfield's back that have started games. Of course, Jalen Mayfield is the only one that started an entire season, as you mentioned, but Ryan Hayes started 2 games at the beginning of last year. Andrew Stuber started games in the 2018 season, of course, had the ACL injury heading into the season last year and missed the entire year. So there's guys with starting experience there. You mentioned Vistardis, you mentioned Chuck Filiaga, 2 veteran guys that really haven't played much, but are now getting their opportunity. So they're not young, inexperienced guys. They're actually older, veteran, inexperienced guys. So, we'll see how that works out for them. At the same time, Ed Warner made it abundantly clear that they haven't put the pads on, and it is completely different than, when you're going in just jerseys with no shoulder pads and shorts, and you're doing walkthroughs and things like that. It's going to come down to who can really push guys, who can keep guys away from the quarterback when they're actually trying to rush the quarterback with all-out reckless abandon. So things could change. I still think that some of those redshirt freshmen that we've been talking so much about throughout the offseason on that offensive line could come in and make an impact, like a Zach Carpenter at center. He could end up winning that job. They really like the true freshman Zach Zinter at one of the guard spots. But I'm confident in this group. I'm a lot more confident than I was probably even at the beginning of August before they canceled the season the first time. And now you got Mayfield back. I know we anticipated him being on the offensive line before everything happened, but I'm a little more confident in this line. A couple more things that I learned this week was Rashad Bateman making it official, Minnesota wide receiver, that he is going to be playing for Minnesota. So that's going to be a tough cover for Michigan. We'll talk about the defense in just a second, but Rondale Moore for Purdue, the same thing. Pat Freiermuth, an All-American tight end for Penn State, the same thing. And it makes you really, really wonder why Nico Collins is not coming back at this point. And it's not official that he won't. We haven't heard official word that he is absolutely gone. He has signed with an agent, but so did Jalen Mayfield. He got cleared this week, as Jim Harbaugh said. So the door is still open for Nico Collins, but it does make you wonder that a guy who's a lesser prospect than a Rashad Bateman or Rondale Moore, why he's not playing for his senior year. It is actually, quite confusing in a way.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it would be in his best interest to come back for another year and boost his draft stock, but obviously we're not in his shoes, so I guess we don't know the full story, but it does make you wonder a little bit. And I think the fact that he signed with famous agent Drew Rosenhaus is probably playing a pretty big factor, but at the same time, we've seen these other college athletes sign with agents and come back. So, like you said, the door isn't completely closed on Nico Collins' return, but at this point, I don't expect it to happen.
Yeah, I don't either, but I would not rule that out. They are in pads though, so at some point, Nico, you got to come back if you want to. And again, I said at the beginning of this whole process that I wouldn't blame anyone for making any type of decision because these are unprecedented times. I mean, when he signed with an agent, he didn't think there was going to be a season, and now here we are. So sometimes in life, when you have your mind made up on something, when you make a decision, even though the circumstances change, sometimes you don't go back on your decision, and that's okay. But it is a little. It's a little, odd that you see some of these other elite wide receivers coming back. And Nico Collins, who I wouldn't necessarily put in the elite category as an NFL prospect, has not yet. But we'll see what plays out on the Nico Collins front. Let's move over to the defense. Some things we learned. Don Brown revealing that Anthony Solomon, who I really like and thought he made a good impact on special teams last year, The redshirt freshman is really neck and neck there with Michael Barrett, the redshirt sophomore, at the Viper spot. And then on the defensive line, Donovan Jeter, once again getting that preseason hype. I'm kind of in a, believe it when I see it mode with Donovan Jeter. I like, he's a big body. I think he has some potential, but he hasn't really put it together in games yet. So I'll believe it when I see it. And then the secondary is a little bit of a concern for me, and Don Brown basically revealing what we thought. DJ Turner and Jalen Perry are kind of those top contenders to start opposite of Vincent Gray at corner. But what were some of your bigger takeaways from listening to Don Brown this week?
Yeah, I'm in believe it when I see it mode with a lot of these preseason talks that we have with these coaches as well, because a lot of these never come to fruition. So take all of these with a grain of salt for anyone listening. But Brown saying that two guys who made the biggest impact or improvement this offseason being redshirt sophomore defensive end Taylor Upshaw and redshirt sophomore defensive end Julius Welshoff was one of my biggest takeaways, because Upshaw was in that 2 deep last year and he saw the field at times in blowouts. So Michigan really needs depth at that defensive end spot behind Pay and Hutchinson, and it's good to hear that both Upshaw and Welshoff have made significant strides. Brown saying that sophomore Anthony Solomon was in a tight battle with redshirt sophomore Michael Barrett at that Viper spot really surprised me, because I thought Barrett had that job locked down and would be the surefire starter there, but apparently that doesn't sound like it's the case. I still think Barrett will be the starter there, but to hear that Solomon is pushing him is good to hear, in my opinion, because I think he has a lot of potential as a sophomore. He played in 10 games last year as a freshman, so I think the Michigan coaches obviously trusted putting him on the field last season. And then perhaps two of the biggest omissions that Brown never mentioned were redshirt junior defensive end Luigi Villain and redshirt freshman defensive tackle Mozzie Smith. It could simply have been that Brown forgot to mention them when he was talking about his entire defense, but at the same time, Villain has battled injuries his entire career here, so it could just be a case that he's banged up again. We don't know for sure. And then Smith has battled stamina issues last year during his only year on campus so far. So it could have been nothing, but there could have been something to it that he didn't mention them as well. So whether or not Villain and Smith are practicing will be two things as well to keep an eye on moving forward.
And the good thing is he did really sing the praises of some of those other guys at those positions. But I agree, coming in, Mozzie Smith was a big X factor for me. Can he give them depth on the D line? I know we mentioned Donovan Jeter, but Jess Spates, another guy, he would be the backup for Carlo Kemp at the nose guard spot. If those two are there and they're really solid and they're depth guys, then that's fine. But I think with Mozzie Smith's upside, you want him to be in that 2 deep just for the sake of the team, knowing that he has that upside, that if he's reaching close to that potential right now as a redshirt freshman, then that would be a good sign for Michigan. But again, yeah, he's even said it before. It's like you start naming guys, then you might leave some out. At the same time, he named a lot of guys, and he kind of was going through the, depth chart maybe in his head. So not exactly sure the reasoning for leaving those guys out, but you hope that they're doing well. One or more thing for me was Dax Hill. Don Brown basically saying he might just be the best cover player in the Big Ten. And, I'm sure Sean Wade of Ohio State cornerback would take exception with that, but he just might be at this point. I think he's going to be a breakout player. I actually put him down for our magazine as my pick for Michigan's MVP this year, and I think that would be a good thing for Michigan because safeties do a lot, especially in a Don Brown defense, especially in a defense that's going to try to cover some of those crossing routes and nail some guys there and make sure that they don't want to catch the ball over the middle. So, but you're going to move him around. Don Brown said in the nickel, they'll play him. He could play corner, and he could play anywhere, and that's been known for quite some time. But, man, do you think Dax Hill's got a shot of being Michigan's MVP this year?
I think MVP is a bit of a stretch just because of the position he plays. You seldom see safeties or nickels or whoever win it, but I have no problem with Brown potentially calling him the best cover guy in the Big Ten. You mentioned Sean Wade, and I think there are a few other corners around the conference who would take exception to that. But in my opinion, Michigan not only has the best safety tandem in the Big Ten, but the two best individual safeties in Daxton Hill and Brad Hawkins. I think the safety crop in the conference as a whole is pretty weak, but that doesn't take away from Hawkins and Hill. They were both, or Hawkins especially, was very, very good as a junior and a starter last year, and then Hill showed what he can be late in the year when he started those final 3 games. So, again, in my opinion, those are the 2 best safeties in the Big Ten, and I think they excel in a big way this year.
Another thing we had to do for the magazine heading into our next issue, which is kind of a de facto football preview one again, 2.0. So you can go to the WolverineOnDemand.com and order that. But it's gonna be a really good issue. But we had to do bold predictions. So I wanted to talk about yours and mine. Before we do that, just want to remind everybody that this podcast is brought to you in part by JFQ Lending with interest rates below 3%. There's never been a better time to lock in a low fixed interest rate on your mortgage. You'll never need to think about refinancing again. Set it and forget it. And with JFQ Lending, you're guaranteed to get the highest level of customer service. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and over 3,000 5-star reviews. Give Josh Yoder a call today at 480-378-0498 or email Josh directly at jyoder@jfqlending.com. JFQ Lending Incorporated, equal access lender, licensed in over 40 states. www.jfqlending.com. So, Austin, my bold prediction was that Kwity Paye ends up with 10-plus sacks this year, despite the shortened season. That'd be 9 games, 10 with a bowl. But I think that he ends up with 10-plus sacks. And bold predictions we were talking about this before the show. What really is a bold prediction? I'm not exactly sure. I think it's something that you think will happen, but has, a slight chance of happening, like a 51% chance of happening, or something you don't think is going to happen, but has the best chance out of the things you don't think will happen to happen. So like 49%. So I'm in that little window there with Kwity Paye having 10-plus sacks, and my reasoning is I think he's just going to have a game where he just goes off for 3 or 4, and then the other ones will be candy from there, and it'll be double digits. And it would really be historic. He'd finish top 10 in Michigan history for sacks in a single season with the shortened season. So it'd be a huge feat for Kwity Paye, but I threw that down as my bold prediction. Let's get yours and give your explanation.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are worried about Michigan's secondary this season with senior cornerback Ambry Thomas leaving for the NFL, but my bold prediction was that Michigan's pass defense as a whole will finish in the top 5 nationally in passing yards allowed per game. They finished in the top 2 in the country in each of Don Brown's first 3 years on the job, 2016 to 2018, and then they slipped to number 10 last year. I think this unit returns to the top 5 in the country, like I said, with Hawkins and Hill and safety, and Vince Gray is the team's top corner. And I'll be honest, I'm not worried about that corner spot opposite Gray. I think redshirt freshman DJ Turner will win that spot, and I think he's going to excel from day one. I'm done doubting position coach Mike Zordich. He's proven us wrong time and time again with the way he develops cornerbacks and has them performing at a borderline elite level every single year. A lot of people were worried about the tandem heading into 2017 with 2 inexperienced sophomores in David Long and Lavert Hill, and they wound up being one of the best corner duos in the country that year. So I think Gray and Turner are going to excel at those corner spots, and Hawkins and Hill at safety. And I think this Michigan secondary is going to be extremely good and, again, finish with one of the 5 best pass defense units in the entire country.
Yeah, I like that bold prediction. I hope it comes to fruition. I love the safeties, and you talked about it earlier with Dax Hill and Brad Hawkins, how they're one of the better duos I kind of agree with you, probably the best in the Big Ten. I am worried, though, outside of Vince Gray at corner, because those guys just don't have any experience. And even Vince Gray, to an extent, I'm at least worried about. I think this is going to be one of the bigger points of contention that we have that, I like Mike Zordich. I'm a huge Mike Zordich fan. But at the same time, he's got to work with what he has. And, I just don't think he has that explosive guy there at the corner spot. And that includes Vince Gray. I think Vince Gray is going to be solid. But I don't know if solid right now is going to cut it against the Ohio States of the world, who have really burned Michigan. And I know a lot of that was on safety play. And again, we're more encouraged with the safety group this year. But, you said extremely good. But do you think that DJ Turner or Jalen Perry or whoever is that second corner along with Vince Gray is going to keep up with some of these elite wide receivers that Ohio State has?
I think they're going to do a better job than what Michigan has done in recent years. With that being said, I think Ohio State is still going to put up points because I don't think there is a team in the country or any defensive backs in the entire country who can slow down Ohio State's receivers significantly. So do I think they'll put up 50 or more like they have the last few years? Absolutely not. But I think Don Brown schematically is going to change some things, and whether that means putting Daxton Hill on some of Ohio State's best receivers or whoever has the best chance of slowing them down and potentially hiding Turner or Gray's weaknesses, if you will. I think Brown will do whatever it takes, and therefore I think Michigan's pass defense will have better results against Ohio State this year than they have in recent years.
I sure hope that he moves Dax Hill around. I sure hope that they have, kind of a game plan to stop individual opponents, kind of like Bill Belichick. You watch the Patriots every week. It's like, last week with Oakland, they have Darren Waller as their tight end, who's just an absolute beast and has come on. He had, 12 catches a couple weeks ago on Monday Night Football. And he just throws Stephon Gilmore on him, and it's like, okay, 2 catches, 1 catch. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I hope they just put the best player on the field. And you could argue that that's Dax Hill, outside of maybe Aiden Hutchinson and Kwity Paye, but the best player outside of the D lineman, put him on the other team's best player on the outside, their best weapon, and see what happens. I hope that they make those adjustments. I hope that they do that, and we'll see, man. I mean, I think that corner, offensive line, those are 2 of the bigger question marks. Linebacker depth, I guess you could throw in there, but I like the starters there on this Michigan team. And like Jim Harbaugh says, the truth will be told on the football field once now pads are on in practice, but obviously we're not at practice. And once October 24th comes around and they're going up against Rashad Bateman for Minnesota, we will know exactly what that strategy is, exactly who are the dudes on that defense, especially in the secondary. So it's going to be fun to watch here. Last thing for today before we send everybody off, our college football picks. I think we did pretty well last week, Austin. I don't have the exact tally, and we haven't really, last year we didn't really keep an exact count of our picks, but it was fun watching some SEC football last week. The ACC, I was watching the weeks before, but they just don't do it for me. The Big 12, same thing. We'll talk about Oklahoma in a second, but can we talk about how good Kyle Pitts is for Florida, tight end? Absolute beast, 4 touchdowns. He kind of reminds me of Darren Waller, who I just talked about. But did you watch that Florida game and how good Kyle Pitts is?
I sure did. Florida put up, about 660 yards of offense or so, and Kyle Pitts, I believe, holding 4 touchdowns. You were having a field day with it, man. I saw some of your tweets about him, and a lot of people around the country were calling him the best tight end in the country. He was a 4-star outside the Rivals 250, so it's not like he was a massive recruit. But some people said, how in the heck did James Franklin let this guy get out of Pennsylvania? He hailed from Pennsylvania, and obviously Florida signed him. But, yeah, as of now, it's hard not to call him the best tight end in the country. And this Florida offense looks scary, unfortunately, with Kyle Trask at quarterback and Damian Pierce and those running backs. So Florida might be the team to beat in the SEC East, especially after what we saw from Georgia last weekend and how bad they looked.
There's starting to be some Heisman rumors about Kyle Pitts.
It's hard to argue with that. I don't think we'll ever see a tight end win it, but if he hauls in 2 or 3 touchdown passes every week, it'd be hard not to give the Heisman to him in this shortened season.
Yeah, and they finally have an offense. You mentioned Kyle Trask. Finally have a quarterback, too, down in Florida. But they blew out Ole Miss last week. And then how about Mississippi State? That's one we talked about as well. I said they would cover that, 17.5? I didn't know they'd win outright. And then KJ Costello, I said he'd throw, 80, 90 passes after throwing 15 a game at Stanford. I think he threw 60-something, low 60s, and he threw for 500-600 yards. Mississippi State, man, that offense with Mike Leach, they're legit. They beat LSU. Now, I don't think LSU is actually going to be that good this year, and I did mention last week that I would take their under 7 wins on their total wins this year. But that was a fun one, too, and I'm glad to see Mississippi State pull off that upset in Death Valley.
Yeah, I loved watching that game. I watched most of the 4th quarter, and how about that debut for Mike Leach down at Mississippi State, man? I didn't see that one coming. Winning in Death Valley in Baton Rouge, I didn't think they'd actually get the job done. KJ Costello could not have had a better debut. Kylan Hill at running back, man. What a weapon he was. They were using him in the passing game like crazy. Mississippi State was one of the most impressive teams of week 1. I agree that LSU will take a huge step back and won't be elite this season, but nevertheless, they're still loaded with talent. I know sophomore cornerback Derek Stingley was out that game, but still, you should never get shredded for 600 passing yards the way Mississippi State tore him up for on Saturday.
Yeah, and what's the game you want Stingley in there for your top corner? It'd be against the air raid Mike Leach offense, but nonetheless, a good win for Mississippi State. We got 3 games that we'll pick this week. Not a great slate, but there's some like pretty good games in here, especially the nightcap with Georgia and Auburn. We'll talk about that in a second. We'll start with Alabama, who let Missouri kind of score at the end there, so they only won by, I think, like 15 last week against a really sorry Missouri team. But Alabama favored by 17.5 over Texas A&M. This is supposed to be Texas A&M's year with Jimbo Fisher. He's finally got some of his guys in there. People were pointing to this year for quite some time. And, man, I just think somehow they're going to cover 17.5, keep it semi-close, but Alabama wins.
I've got Alabama winning by more than 17.5. Game is down at Alabama, and after what Texas A&M showed last Saturday night, there's no way I can pick them to keep this game close. They only beat Vanderbilt at home by 5. I believe the final score was 17-12, and it was extremely ugly. Alabama just doesn't miss a beat on offense. Mac Jones, as a redshirt junior, steps in and goes 18 for 24. I think he's going to be a stud this season. Jalen Waddle looks to be the next elite Alabama receiver. He had 134 yards against Missouri. John Mechie looks like he could be a star in the making at receiver. So, unfortunately, I think this one's going to be a blowout. But I think that says more about Texas A&M than it does about Alabama and how Texas A&M doesn't look to be very good so far.
Okay, so we're at odds there. And then one of the night games, this will be on ABC, Oklahoma at Iowa State in Ames, Iowa. Oklahoma favored by 7 on the road. I'm very torn on this game because I always have a theory that you have a top-ranked team heading into Iowa State, and they just lose. I mean, Iowa State always pulls off the upsets there. There will not be I don't know the exact fan count, but I assume there'll either be no fans or super, super limited, so that won't be a huge factor. Also, Oklahoma coming off of another embarrassing loss. 2 straight years they've lost to Kansas State. So I think it's going to be a bounce-back game for Oklahoma, so I'm going to go against my theory that you lose at Iowa State. If they were in the top 10, they would lose, but Oklahoma ranked at 18 this week. I'll take Oklahoma to win by more than a touchdown.
You know what? I agree. I think Oklahoma wins by more than 7 as well. I don't really know why. After what we've seen from both teams so far this year, you really can't figure Iowa State out. They lose to Louisiana Lafayette in that opener in Ames, and then they bounce back and win at TCU last weekend. Granted, TCU probably isn't very good, but that was still an impressive bounce back for Iowa State. And Oklahoma really blew it last week, man, against Kansas State, losing at home 38-35. They're calling for rain down in Ames on Saturday night, so that could potentially slow down Oklahoma's passing attack. But Spencer Rattler had an outstanding game last Saturday, the redshirt freshman quarterback, except for the fact that he threw 3 picks. And that's something that past Oklahoma quarterbacks obviously have not done much in recent years. They still have the elite receivers out there in Norman with guys like Theo Wees and Marvin Mims and Charleston Rambo. But again, if Rattler keeps turning the ball over, that could change things. So I'm picking Oklahoma to win a fairly tight one. I'm going to say they get it done by 10 Saturday night in Iowa State.
The Big 12, I don't even know. I don't know.
There's almost no reason for us to predict these games because it feels like anybody can beat anybody on any given Saturday.
And anyone can beat anyone, even if they're up 15 with 3 minutes to go, as we saw Texas Tech last week. But there's just no defense in that conference. I can't wait till we get the best conference back in the Big Ten on October 23rd. But we'll pick the last game in another real conference on the field. I don't want to talk about all the off-the-field stuff with the SEC, but Georgia favored by 6.5 over Auburn in the nightcap, the other nightcap. So that'll be going on at the same time as Oklahoma and Iowa State. This one's on ESPN. You mentioned it, man. I mean, Georgia, Auburn, neither of them really looked great. I am just going to go with Georgia here. Again, I know they didn't lose, but it'll be kind of like a bounce back, like a wake-up call type game. I wasn't overly impressed with Auburn against Kentucky last week. I thought Kentucky kind of self-imploded there in that third quarter, so I'm going to go with Georgia to win by a touchdown. So I guess I'm taking the 2 favorites, 1 underdog here But I'll go with Georgia.
Man, you and I agree again. Excuse me. Both teams looked pretty bad last Saturday, but I've got Georgia winning by 7 as well. I would have liked to pick Auburn, but after watching them last Saturday against Kentucky, I just can't do that. The running game wasn't really present with DJ Williams and Sean Shivers. I know they have sophomore quarterback Bo Nix, who's very good, but their offense did not impress last Saturday at all, and neither did Georgia's. Georgia was trailing in the third quarter at Arkansas last Saturday against an Arkansas program who has been one of the worst power conference teams in recent years. So Georgia really struggled as well. Dwan Mathis played quarterback for them for a little bit of that game. He was a 4-star out of Oak Park, Michigan, so local people will probably remember that name, but again, Georgia really struggled. They played Stetson Bennett for parts of that game at quarterback as well. The final score was very deceiving. That was much closer than the score indicated. I think this is going to be a pretty ugly game, and I've got Georgia winning a tight one. I will say Georgia by 7 over Auburn in this one.
How about Felipe Franks over at Arkansas in his 9th year in college football?
In his 9th year, it sure feels like it, doesn't it? He's kind of redeeming himself, if you will, a little bit. He had his ups and downs over at Florida, but man, under first-year head coach Sam Pittman down at Arkansas, it looks like he's actually doing some good things and could finish his career on a high note.
Yeah, he's all right. He's a decent quarterback, and again, Arkansas, I mean, that's exactly what they need, just someone that's at least competent at the quarterback spot. But that is our show for this week. Those are our picks. Talked about quite a bit with Michigan football, got into some college football from around the country. Remember to head over to thewolverine.com, use promo code BLUE60. If you're not a subscriber already, you get 60 days free of our premium content. Rate us 5 stars and subscribe on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you listen on. Follow us on Twitter at The Wolverine Mag. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Wolverine Magazine. And finally, subscribe to us on YouTube at youtube.com/The Wolverine Video. We will talk to everybody next week.